Thank you so much, Dan. So half of my introduction doesn't need to be done anymore. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm Charlotte Wood. As you know, I'm so delighted to be here on Gadigal land tonight to talk with Fenella about this rich, wise and joyful book, How to Fake Being Tidy. Fenella and other things my mother never taught me.
Poor mother.
You've heard about Fenella's illustrious career as a magazine feature writer and editor, and her more recent work in radio producing. If you haven't heard Fenella's radio series, you really should go check them out on Radio National. They include the completely riveting Money, in which she asked couples extremely personal questions about how they deal with money, which opened up very surprising and revelatory, often to the people themselves, conversations about relationships, power and equality in the home. It is really riveting. And more recently, Amazon Acres, the portrait of a 1970s women-only commune in the bush, which had 3 central rules: no men, no meat, no machines. And it is also completely riveting. In between all of this, Fenella has kept writing and thinking, especially about the minutiae of contemporary living and friendships and home life. I first met Fenella around about 15 years ago. I was trying to work it out, when I bummed a cigarette from her at our mutual friend David's birthday party. David's standing at the back. I had always admired Fenella's elegant and complex, insightful features in Good Weekend and elsewhere, and I confess I was actually really quite starstruck to meet her and Bloodshed Ciggies in the flesh. Since that lovely long ago party, we have both given up smoking, but I've been very lucky to call Fenella a dear friend. We've shared many meals, recipes, friends, holidays, and a great many conversations about the kind of stuff that is in this book, which is exactly as Richard Glover says on the cover, a glorious account of how the little things in life are, of course, the big things. So I would like you to welcome Fenella again with me now. Fenella, I'm going to open by asking about the epigraph of the book, which is a paragraph from Deborah Levy's book, The Cost of Living. Deborah Levy is a British novelist and writer. And it says this: it requires skill, time, dedication and empathy to create a home that everyone enjoys and that functions well. Above all else, it is an act of immense generosity to be the architect of everyone else's well-being. This task is still mostly perceived as women's work. Consequently, there are all kinds of words used to belittle this huge endeavour. So why did you choose that quote, Fenella, and why do you find home life particularly so interesting to write about?
Well, I wish I'd written that quote myself, but I think it sums up the ambiguity that so many women in particular feel about home life, or liking to do things around the house, or I don't know, maybe it's just my ambivalence about it, but I've always enjoyed domestic task to some degree, but then of course there's that fine line where it kind of shades into drudgery. So I suppose I wanted to explore, one, how people, I think it is an immense task that, you know, to run a household well, to make things comfortable, to make an environment that people enjoy being in, to feed people day after day. So I wanted to look first at the people who do that extremely well, and I know some of those people who do it sort of seamlessly and apparently effortlessly. So it was kind of a how-to for me. But it was also looking at just, I suppose, a kind of chronicle of days, you know, that a lot of our life we think of as the big picture of our career or the sort of big achievements we have, when so much of it's about actually day-to-day, what happens in the house, what happens with friends, what happens with family. So yeah, that's always intriguing. Plus, I've always loved the handy hints that used to be in the paper, so that was another aspect of it.
And did you read them when you were a kid?
Yeah, I did. That's sad, isn't it?
I did too. I love them, which is weird.
There was a sort of sense that if you could get on top of these hints, you know, everything would be sort of under control or explained in some sort of cosmic way. But I also love the generosity of women, that they would share this knowledge, and you know, it might be sort of tiny knowledge about how to get out a wine stain or a berry stain, but it was sort of given with incredible generosity and this sense that there was a community of people reading it and all sort of sharing these tasks. So I think I like that about it as well, and there was a kind of magic. Yeah.
So this book is a collection of pieces, of short sort of little chapters, I guess, about all kinds of things to do with home, and the tendrils that kind of spiral out from that about friendship and cohabiting and so on. So you talk about things from the pleasures of cooking to how to fold a towel to
Which
ironing.
I learned in the course of doing this book, because I didn't know that before. That was one of the things my mother didn't tell me.
Well, these things, you know, ironing, towel folding, really sound like quite sort of 1950s housewifey things for an avowed feminist like yourself to be interested in.
Yeah, well, that's where the ambivalence comes in. That, you know, I think you sort of think, well, yes, you don't want to spend your whole life worrying about how you folded the towel or whether, you know, the house is not up to scratch. But on the other hand, there's a sort of meditative mindfulness thing about it. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted your question.
Yes, how dare you? Let's talk about me at your book event. Well, one of the things that I think works so well in the book is that there's a lovely energy that comes from the persona of you as... it's almost like Fenella's adventures in Tidyland, because it's sort of a chronicle of a messy person who longs to blossom into a tidy person but never actually quite makes it.
Yeah, but why do I long to blossom into a tidy person? That's one of the things I wanted to look at. You know, is there a sort of inherent appeal in being tidy? I certainly don't think it's compulsory. Like, you know, I don't think people should worry if they're not tidy, and I haven't managed it. But I'm sort of impressed by people who do manage it all the time.
Right, well, let's just cut straight to the chase about people who are tidy, because I am fascinated by those people. If you hear any snorts from the audience while I'm talking about being tidy, it's because my husband is in the room and he is quite tidy and I am not. But I am fascinated I wish I was tidy.
But why do you wish you were tidy?
Because there's a serenity that comes to your surroundings from tidiness.
Oh, that's right. I say that in the book, don't I?
Yeah. I'm going to ask you to read, because this piece, When Ellen Came to Stay, has some. It's like Fenella having a kind of epiphany about tidiness, and Ellen is a colleague of Fenella's, who is one of those immaculate women who always looks perfect and her house is perfect. And I think you say her sweaters are sort of pastel cashmere and spotless, and they seem to not know that they're supposed to pill ever. But one day Fenella got a call from Ellen.
Yeah, so I didn't know her very well socially. I just knew her a bit, but I had been to her house. She'd never been to mine. So I got the call. So I was surprised that Saturday to learn Ellen was calling because she and her husband had had an argument and her husband had hit her. In all that neatness. Just a slap, really, open palm, Ellen said. But I remember you once said that no one should put up with that kind of thing. Any woman should leave the bastard straight away, you said. Had I? So would it be all right if I came over to stay for a bit? Stay? At my place? Of course, I said weakly, putting the phone down. I was shocked back then, I was in my 20s at the time, that Ellen's nice middle-class husband had hit her. I was shocked that Ellen didn't have any closer friends than me. Shamefully, though, I was mostly shocked that Ellen was going to be at my house any minute. I was a single mother at that point, sharing an inner-city terrace with 2 small children and a bohemian blue-stocking flatmate who made novelist Iris Murdoch, famous for never wasting her time tidying or cleaning, look house-proud. So while our home was pleasant, it was generally left messy enough to suggest we existed on a lofty plane above such petty concerns as housework. I glanced around, taking in the decaying pile of washing up that had been assigned for later. The children's clothes and toys lay strewn around like detritus from a shipwreck of infants. A crunchy line of Rice Krispies interspersed with space Lego ran up the hall. The grease on the stove glinted evilly in the sunlight. In the bathroom, damp towels hung slack and sullen, practically with fags hanging out of their mouths. Help! I figured I had about 30 minutes. Fortunately, I'm known for my speed cleaning, a handy skill that doesn't bear close inspection. I shoved the loose items into a laundry basket and hurled it into the children's room. I washed and put everything away. I cleaned the bathroom, polished mirrors, vacuumed, sprayed glass, dusted windowsills, put clean sheets on the spare bed, shoved the bills and paperwork miscellaneous into the back of the sideboard. And then I waited, sitting motionless on a chair so as not to scare off the unfamiliar order that I'd invited in for a first tentative visit. Another half hour passed. It seemed safe to have a cup of tea. But then the dirty cup clashed with the new tidiness. I washed and dried it and put it back on the shelf, remembering Ellen's observation in the office canteen that cup handles should all face the same way. I straightened them. I wiped down the table. I gave the teapot a wash and polish, surprised to find it was actually yellow. An hour passed. I made myself a sandwich. The makings looked messy. I packed them away. I swept the floor. Only then did I eat the sandwich. I washed and dried everything again, and so it went on. It came to me, dimly, when I wasn't worrying about Ellen, that this was how neat people managed to be neat. They are like this all the time. They put things away immediately. They clean as they go. They toothpick out the gunk on the tap. They don't feel that now is an inconvenient moment to wipe the bench. They don't take a nap instead of mopping the floor. Ellen had told me she simply couldn't relax if anything was untidy. It was exhausting. It was so constant. Every action had to be countered with a cleaning and tidying action right away, like a small punishment exacted for every pleasure. By the time Ellen knocked on the door, she'd stopped off for coffee, she said, I was back in the chair. She didn't say anything about the house, nary a glance at the skirting boards. Remarkably, she seemed more concerned about the state of her marriage than the state of my house. And it wasn't her house after all. Her husband called and came round about an hour later, and for better or worse, they kissed and made up. They went home, Ellen with the name of a women's refuge tucked into her expensive lint-free handbag, me wondering how long the neatness would last, and why I'd worried about all the wrong things.
Wow. Beautiful piece that shows off Fenella's sort of witty elegance while always touching on the deeper things of life. So why, I love that this poor woman whose life is falling apart and your deepest anxiety is about the state of your skirting boards in that moment. Why do we care so much what other people think of our houses? You know, why is there this terror of people turning up unannounced?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, the turning up unannounced, that's my definition of a tidy person. A tidy person can have an unexpected visitor, drop in any time, and it's fine. You know, like they're totally tidy, no worries. The fake tidy person like me has to have some warning so that, of course, you can shove everything back and open.
You did do a lot in 30 minutes, I must say.
Yeah, I'm very quick.
Polishing the mirrors. Holy dooly.
I am speedy. But as I say, you can't look very closely. I know when I was doing a talkback recently, a woman rang up and said she had a panic room. And the panic room is not actually where she shoves everything. The panic room is the room she keeps tidy so that if anyone comes around, they just can be immediately led into the panic room. I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it, why we equate mess or something as or tidiness as some kind of virtue. Because the other side of that is, I think, messy people are also seen as kind of more interesting and a bit looser, and so it's sort of double-edged.
Well, there's so many judgments attached to whatever state you are, but there's also something to do with our insides and our outsides, don't you think? Like, we can go out into the world looking immaculate, possibly, but our houses might be a tip. So there's this sort of sense that the house is some kind of revelation of who you really are.
Yeah, that's true. And yet it's not, of course. I mean, in Ellen's case, she had this sense that everything would be it was totally under control. She just had to keep the house tidy and fine. And then this thing happened that was completely unexpected.
Yeah, terrible. So sort of the whole tidy house equals a tidy life is just nonsense. And yet...
And yet we do care about it to some extent. We do see that it reflects us in some way. But I don't know, and I think it's also something to do with encroaching chaos and some sense of sort of being in control of everything if things aren't too messy in the house. You know, and our home lives and our exterior lives are obviously deeply connected.
One of the bits I love most in that reading is this shock of discovery that this is what tidy people do all the time. And I share that shock. So let's get down to what actually does make a tidy person, because you have a whole lovely chapter on this, on the habits of highly effective, clean and tidy people, otherwise known as HEC and TPs. So what are these habits that you discovered in the course of your research?
I hasten to add that the whole book isn't about being tidy, but this is chapter.
No, we're going to get on to some of the other things.
Wiping the benches regularly. Making the beds every day. Every day. I can see some people like that.
But we don't know if that was a snort of what else would you do, or...
Was that a snort of what else would you do, or was it a snort of every day? Well, the one that got me in this list of, and I didn't make this list, I hasten to add that I read it, was people who clean the fridge every week.
Yeah, that got me the most as well. Every week.
Are you kidding?
The fridge.
Yeah.
Who are these people?
There may be, I won't ask for a show of hands of who cleans the fridge here, but so that was another thing. So it's all sort of, it's basically about routine, isn't it? You're doing things regularly.
But also, I think it's about being a planner ahead. Like I said to Fenella the other day, I've realised another thing about tidy people. They must be good at throwing stuff away. So my example was, I bought the wrong light globes for whatever we needed. So I've got these wrong light globes. So they just sort of hang around the house, moving from space to space. I was like, well, I can't throw them away. That would be terrible waste. But what am I going to do with them? So they just live on the bench, moving here and here. So I think, do tidy people either ruthlessly throw them, or they would never buy the wrong light globe in the first place?
That's probably, I don't know. Not being a naturally tidy person, I can't answer that question. But I think you've hit on the nail on the head, and that is clutter. That we've got too many things, and I'm a person that has like 3 or 4 of the same thing, because they all seem kind of slightly useful in a slightly different way. So I can't.
Well, we're going to get onto your habit of having several of the same thing a little bit later.
But I agree that the waste question makes it hard. So, there's obviously, you can give donations to the op shop and everything, but actually throwing things in the garbage is quite hard.
I hasten to add that the list of habits of highly effective, clean and tidy people is followed by a list of habits of highly effective, slovenly people on the same page, which includes procrastinate daily, etc. So do you think that tidy people find being tidy interesting? Like, I love having a tidy house because it makes life very serene, as I said before. And I can get very interested in bursts of tidiness, and things like tidying the spice drawer, which I did recently, twice, because...
And sent pictures to everybody.
And sent pictures to her friends. Or, condo folding my undies. I love doing that, and then I send pictures to my friends and tell them, and they just roll their eyes in utter boredom and disgust. But the trouble for me is that I can never make it stick. Like, I do that, and then in a burst on a weekend, and feel very proud and serene and grown up, and then sort of 7 months of chaos ensues, and then I can't.
But there is something to be said for that method as well, because if you're not tidy all the time, when you do tidy, it's like immensely satisfying because the difference is so great between before and after. Whereas if you tidy all the time, it's like...
I think you'd live a very serene life, and you wouldn't have to sit on the chair like you did, motionless, in case everything changes.
But it's a personality thing, isn't it? Some people, I think, that actually find it quite distressing to be in mess or to have a lot of stuff on the bench, or I don't know. There are sort of psychological things at work, I think, and at the other end, the sort of extreme end, of course, is some sort of obsessive compulsive thing which makes it very uncomfortable for other people in the house. So somewhere between on the spectrum. I think.
I'd like to be further up that end of the spectrum myself.
But if you're not, because if you wanted to be, you would have been by now, I think. This is what I've discovered in trying to learn how to do it, that it's very hard to break old habits. But, you know, things like rosters or routines really help if you want to change.
Moving away from tidiness, as I frequently do in my own life, there are actually, so there's this sort of light-hearted inquiry into, you know, how to live. There are also quite a few bigger themes, I think, running through the book, cunningly disguised as this sort of romp through light-hearted, modern, independent living. Friendship is one theme, but another less obvious theme, I think, is motherhood. Now, you lost your mum at a very early age, and you write very beautifully about it. I'm going to read, if you don't mind, from a piece called Losing My Mother, which is page... here. And so Fenella lost her mum very suddenly when you were 16, which I just find, you know, I don't know how you coped with that. And she was sick sort of quite quickly, and you didn't know really what was wrong with her. The day after we had visited her in hospital, which turned out to be the last time I would ever see her, I came home from school on a bright spring afternoon to find a note from my father. It said my mother had been rushed to intensive care at Sydney Hospital. In fact, I don't remember exactly what it said. Did it say rushed? Did it mention intensive care? But I can see the piece of torn paper there, strapped to one of the smooth internal pillars that held up our modernist house, the house my parents had built. For years afterwards, a little yellowing square of sticky tape marked the spot. Later that afternoon, my father came back for us and we drove to the hospital. The three of us sat for what seemed like hours in a pale green corridor while doors opened and closed and staff squeaked past on soft, rubber-soled feet. We waited quietly, not asking questions or making demands, as I recall. My father was not an assertive man. Eventually, we were told by someone in some inadequate set of words that she had died. Post-operative peritonitis. An orderly handed my father an envelope with her wedding ring. Died? My mother? How could that be? We left that place somehow. I now understand the meaning of phrases like weak-kneed with shock and weighed down by grief. It was as if I were walking under a crushing weight. The sounds of the world shut down, time and motion slowed. I remember a man in the hospital lift eating hot chips, such an ordinary thing. The sharp tang of the vinegar, like smelling salts. We went home because that's what you do. You go home and you let people know. And then in the days that follow, relatives arrive and go home again. A funeral is arranged and the women plan sandwiches and drinks. I had just turned 16. I had never been to a funeral. My mother hadn't let me go to my grandmother's because she thought it would be too upsetting. Twilight was falling as we drove back home over the harbour bridge the day she died. And there was a particularly brilliant sunset. Fine bronzed clouds stretched out against an orange sky, below a receding heaven of palest blue that held an early sliver of moon. As I sat in that silent car with what was left of my family, two thoughts kept running around my mind, a mind still feverish with teenage melodrama. Such a big thing, and it had happened to me. Not yet taking in the foreverness of it. Not yet dull with despair. I thought, my mother will never see such a sky again. We are alone. I have tried to read, I've practiced reading that 100 times, and I cannot read it without crying. It's just sweet.
Well, you lost parents early too. So, you know.
This is about the writing and that. I mean, anyone here who has lost someone will know how perfectly written that is. I will compose myself. So my question, I mean, this is the beauty of this book. It moves from the laugh out loud to this shock of really, of great depth and beauty. So my question is about what you think losing your mum did for your sense of home as you grew into an adult. You became a mother very young yourself. So how did losing your mum at that critical age for a young girl shape your way of making a home for other people and your own child?
Well, yeah, it's interesting you should ask that, because somebody else asked me, a radio interviewer asked me, so do you think that, and to be honest, it had never occurred to me that that's why I might be so interested in home things, that I was trying to create some sort of home that had been lost when I was young. I don't think it's entirely that, because I was always interested in those kind of things, even as a child. You know, even when my mother was alive, I was very interested in cooking, and she used to buy me these magazines that sort of set me off.
And she wasn't much of a homemaker.
No, because she came from that generation where that was the only choice. That's what she did, and she didn't particularly want to do that. She worked outside the home as well, and she wanted, a more unconventional. So I don't blame her for not teaching me how to fold towels. I think it was good that she was doing other things. But yes, perhaps I have been always trying to sort of, knit together a broken thing in some way. It's quite possible.
Another strand of the book is friendship, that sort of ripples through in this very beautiful way, especially friendship between women. And you write very tenderly and often very hilariously about the ways that women communicate through certain sort of rituals, like cooking or gifts or clothes shopping, in a fantastic piece that I actually read at Fenella's launch about being trapped in the boutique with those sorts of saleswomen. And as soon as you say the word leopard women, every woman knows what kind of saleswoman you're talking about. But you make these very close observations of these tiny moments between women in their friendships. How important are these tiny details, the nuances of like little moments in friendships between women, particularly compared to men, do you think?
Oh, they're vitally important, I think. And I think women are very attuned to those small moments. They could gesture, a word, a characteristic, where it's like our antenna is always operating, always kind of interpreting things. And female friendship is just such a precious thing, and especially as you get older as well. I think you value it even more. And women, people say, oh, women of a certain age are invisible. Well, they're not invisible to each other. Like women are very aware of other women. And I think that's how you're kind of seen and valued, and it's like a very precious thing.
There's one particular piece, I can't remember what it's called, it's the one about taste, when Fenella writes so beautifully about the sort of conventions of conversation between women, and Fenella's talking to her friend very reasonably about the different shades of white on a bathroom tile. And her friend Frances...
it would be boring.
Her friend Frances puts up her hand and says, it doesn't matter. And there's this sort of shock of what happened in this friendship, in this conversation, because you thought, hang on, isn't this what we do?
Yeah. Well, I think Frances didn't know about that code where you're just supposed to go, I can see why that would be a problem. Anyway, so she just went straight in. Of course, she was totally right. It doesn't matter, but it seemed to be important at the time.
Well, one of the things I think that's kind of makes people feel guilty about talking about this stuff is that, we're living in the middle of a pandemic, the world is on fire, or sea levels are rising, there's just shocking brutality, racial injustice, the patriarchy, all this big stuff going on around the world that we need to be engaged with, and we are engaged with. So sometimes talking about things like, shoes or bathroom tiles or how to get the stain out of a table or whatever, seems so trivial. You know, the whole term first world problem.
Just get rid of this book now.
Yeah, actually, forget it. Yeah.
Well, yes, but we always have that. We always have that in life, don't we? You know, the absurd and the shallow and going on with all the deep stuff, because you can't always be swimming in the depths. You know, you also have to kind of surface and have your small life going on. And you know, there's always that balance. It doesn't mean that one thing is equal to the other or more important. I mean, the trivial stuff is not more important, but we still experience it. And if you don't have that, you know, you just sink really under the weight of the terribleness. So,
and it doesn't mean you can't also
be active,
protest
active
patriarchy
citizen as well, of course.
Let's talk about stuff, like material stuff, because one of the things that, as we said earlier, that HEC and TPs, highly effective, clean and tidy people, are good at, is controlling material stuff. And there's quite a few pieces in the book that are to do with whether you keep stuff or throw it away, how to store stuff, how not to attach too much to stuff, how to keep the stuff that you have in good nick. What about we have a bit of a reading from the time you helped your friend chuck out her stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I realise this is a continuing theme in the book, which is that I have too much stuff, and this is why it's hard to get things under control. And it's also why this chapter is called Why It's Easy to Be Ruthless with Other People's Stuff. I went around to Kirsty's last week to help her pack up her house. It had been her home for 25 years. Plenty of time, in other words, for junk and sentiment to mate and produce riotous litters of objects she didn't need but would probably be inclined to keep. My job was to cut through the sentiment and throw out the junk. Her junk. My junk would still be safely cluttering up my place. She's moving into a flat about 1/8 of the size, and nothing concentrates the mind about possessions like extreme downsizing. It's almost as good as dying in that respect. Death, like strong daylight, has a way of turning your idea of priceless treasures into someone else's idea of genuine trash. I often look around at my own house and imagine my relatives sifting through the ruins of my future deceased estate with brutal precision, holding up something like my extensive rubber band collection and exclaiming, "Can you believe she kept all this?" But then one of them will find something else and say, "Oh, but remember this?" And then they'll cry hard, and then they'll throw both of them out. So there we were at Kirsty's house. What to keep, what to let go. It's so much easier to be merciless with other people's stuff. I picked up a sugar bowl with a chipped lid and raised an eyebrow. "Keep!" Kirsty yelled. "It was given to my grandfather by an Austrian princess, or so the story goes." An hour or two in, Kirsty was beginning to doubt some of the family lore. For example, the drab sideboard her late mother had always insisted was solid oak was now revealed to be veneer. Ditto the glass and silver carafe, not from the 1800s after all, but the 1930s. Had there ever been an Austrian princess with a sugar bowl? It was starting to feel like a particularly sobering episode of Antiques Roadshow. Still, she wasn't ready to let go. A fatally strong sense of duty meant Kirsty had become keeper of the flame for 6 dead relatives and their former possessions, regardless of her own feelings towards them, the possessions, that is. It had been part and parcel of curating the family stories and honouring her forebears' history, she said, yanking the sugar bowl from my hands. But wasn't now the moment to throw off the yoke of obligation, I asked, invoke a statute of limitations, especially with the ugly stuff? I tried that line with the horrible 1930s Jacobean-style lounge suite as we broke for lunch. Some people like the style with its dark carved wood and rattan sides, and if you had an Elizabethan lounge room, it would probably be fine. But Kirsty didn't. I'd always disliked its squat, heavy look, and said so, knowing it was inherited, but also that Kirsty is the kind of woman you could say that to and she wouldn't take it personally. She once told me in a matter-of-fact way that she had no taste, meaning no good taste, I suppose, making her possibly the only person in the world ever to admit that. Everybody thinks they have good taste, just as everybody thinks they're a good driver. So, would the lounge suite be going with her? I have to keep it, she said. Have to? It was custom made for my grandfather after the Depression. See how the arms are flat and wide like that? It was designed so he could balance a cup of tea on them. And it meant a lot to the family, being able to buy something like that after the hard times. Touching, I said. But the point is, do you like it? Not much. Is it comfortable? Not particularly. Will it suit the new flat? Not really. Her aunt had minded it for years. On the aunt's death, Kirsty had assumed custody, like a kind-hearted relative taking on an unattractive orphan nobody else wants. That was 30 years ago. Was the plan for her children to inherit it? No, they hate it. Too old-fashioned. And it doesn't mean anything to them. Anyway, it's coming with me, non-negotiable. Code 4, go back to bubble wrapping the china, my friend, and shut up. Kirsty comes from a generation, the last... Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Yes.
Continue? Okay. Kirsty comes from a generation, the last perhaps, that valued the notion of things being handed down. Anything that was quality or prized or held a history. Anything that carried fond memories of the person who had once owned it. It's hard to imagine now what might be passed down. Can an object from IKEA or fantastic furniture mean something? No offence to anyone who's got fantastic furniture. On the other hand, object inheritance can be a burden. As Kirsty would admit later, she found it quite liberating to be told she didn't have to haul these things around, albatross-like, until death, if she didn't care for them. At first I thought, well, liking or not liking them isn't the point, she said. But then I thought, yes, it is the point, in principle. After a few hours, we'd got down to the last few things in the china cupboard. What about this undistinguished grey cup without a saucer, I said. Chuck? No way, Kirsty yelped. I'm sure the saucer is here someplace. And look, see the anchor symbol? It's off a ship. It must have been when Mum sailed to somewhere or other. My own house, of course, is loaded with such odd mementos. Very often they're random physical reminders of our cherished dead. My mother's china, my grandmother's snow dome and old-fashioned brooches, my late husband's ex-cigar boxes, still filled with a spicy odour that brings him back in a moment, for a moment. We keep them because they have the power to summon up a vivid presence in the face of an utterly mysterious absence. How many do we need to hang on to? Probably not as many as we think, but I wrapped the little grey cup anyway.
Oh, beautiful. We're going to come to your questions shortly, but I almost don't need to ask this question, but okay, it's easy to chuck out other people's stuff, but with your own stuff, are you a keeper or a chucker?
Well, I'm sort of, I suppose, like anally expulsive, so I'll have like I keep
nice imagery.
Sorry, yes. I keep everything. I have too much stuff, and then I have a big throw out. But that means, of course, that the vacuum is created where you can get more stuff in to fill that space. But I do have big throwouts. But also, the thing is, we've lived in the same house for many, many years, and it's better if you move, I think, because it forces you to clear
or you
out
get it
stuff.
painted or renovated or something.
Yeah, you have to do that. Because now I think, I can still fit everything in, so why throw it out? But I can see that's the wrong attitude.
Well, you are a keeper, but you are also the great returner. And Fenella is a returner of more goods to shops than anyone I've ever known. And recently we had a sort of, in summer, a little, with friends going on picnics, and we decided I would like one of those beach chairs, because our friend Leslie has the perfect beach chair, which everyone is always in search of. Anyway, so I went and bought some beach chairs. Fenella went and brought about 9 different kinds of beach chairs, I think.
I think it was 8.
Oh, sorry. Let's not quibble. And then returned most of them via the post office.
I know.
So it takes a certain amount of chutzpah to return things because you've changed your mind. But you are an expert at this.
Yeah, well, it's a shocking waste of time, of course, because it means you're just spending twice as much time as you would if you just bought the right thing in the first place, obviously. But somehow I can't do that. And I don't know, I think it's all... this is why so much of this book is, Freudian psychology running through it somewhere. Fear of commitment, fear of making a mistake, doubt about your own sort of judgment and stuff. Yeah, and it is quite hard returning. Like, even if you're totally legitimate, you've got the tags on, you haven't used it, you've got it in the packaging. I still feel a bit guilty when I actually sort of front up to the counter, and sometimes, like sometimes they don't care. They go, oh yeah, whatever, take it back. And then other times they'll sort of forensically go through it to see if you've got any vomit on it or cigarette stains from a party or something. And I do tell a story in the book, possibly apocryphal, that a woman in a shop told me about how a woman had come in and said, I need a dress for my mother's funeral, and the woman had helped her and they picked out a lovely dress, and the woman was very pleased with it, went away, came back 3 days later, returned the dress. I said, oh, okay, oh yes, that's fine, whatever. Then she sold the dress to somebody else. That woman came back 2 days later and said, look, I just came out in this shocking rash. I'm just like head to toe rash from wearing that dress. It's the fabric. Anyway, they were so bemused by this that the shop apparently had the dress analysed, and it was covered in formalin. So the woman hadn't used it. It was for her mother's funeral, but it was for the mother, not for her. So I sort of think, what was it at the funeral home? She goes like, just keep the tags on.
I think that's a good point for us to open up to audience questions. If you have any questions about Fenella's book, her beautiful, beautiful writing, or perhaps, how to get a red wine stain out of a...
I can help you.
I don't know what. She can help. If you don't have questions, I have many more. So,
question up there.
David has a question.
Fenella, I'm halfway through your fantastic book. It's hilarious and moving. So you may sort of deal with this question somewhere, further on. But I was wondering whether you think that we all sort of go forward towards this idea of perfection, and do you think that, like, we untidy people want to be more tidy? Do you think that tidy people also have this sort of false idea of perfection, and they aspire to something else themselves?
I have to repeat this question for our friends watching the live stream on Facebook. The question was that, I think we untidy people yearn to be tidy, but do tidy people sort of yearn for the other state as well? Is that a fair...
Or to be even more tidy.
Or to be even more tidy.
Yeah.
I think super tidy people are sometimes a little bit embarrassed about it, because that's what I mean. That's the other side of it. Even though messy people go, oh, I'm terrible messy, they're kind of secretly proud of being messy, because it's like, I'm so
creative.
I'm creative. I haven't got time to do this kind of stuff. So tidy people can feel a bit like, I'm not really very interesting because look how tidy I am. I think so. I don't think they want to get less tidy. They can't help being tidy, but they're not going to try to get tidier, would be my feeling. Yeah.
I have a supplementary question to that, which is about the difference between an untidy, messy person and a not very clean house person.
Yes,
because I think that's where the real social stigma comes in for people like me.
People make this distinction quite often. They say, oh, like, I'm messy, but I'm not dirty.
Which is a lie, right?
Yeah, it's a lie. Because, the two...
In my house, it's a lie.
The two... No, okay, I can see people nodding. I said, no, it's not a lie. I'm messy, but I'm not dirty.
Do we have another question?
Yes.
Sorry. We'll come to you.
When I find this advertisement about your book, so I was thinking, wow, it will give me instruction how to deal with my mother-in-law.
Yeah. Well, that's what,
a lot of people say that. Just need to repeat the question for the watchers online. This lovely person has come to the event because she needs to know how to deal with her mother-in-law. And I assume a mother-in-law who turns up to your house with the white glove, testing out your, tidiness. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Both of them. Second marriage and both mothers-in-law. Oh, You've picked the wrong ones, haven't you? Fenella, can you answer the question?
Well, my advice would be either get tidier and clean up more, or don't let it worry you. Don't let it worry you. Go, let it go dusty and then go, yep.
Suck it up, princess.
But yeah, I didn't really touch on mothers-in-law because I didn't have it. Yeah, that's true.
Volume 2.
But a lot of people do say, oh, I always tidy when my mother's coming over. So obviously it's a big thing that another generation will be critical of you. Yeah, but I don't know.
Do the mothers in this group feel judgmental about their children's houses, tidiness or not? Oh, yes, no.
No.
Maybe the less if the husband chose her.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay, we're getting into real psychotherapy now. So we'll move on. There's a question down the front here.
I guess it's a question. I've always noticed when I do a tidy up, because I'm untidy basically. I mean, just things get strewn around the house all the time. But if someone's coming to stay, there's a big panic on, so I just grab everything, put them in bags and stick them in the cupboard, under the bed. You have to find
as good a method as any.
Yeah. And then really clean the bathroom. But I mean, basically, when I do tidy, I always find that I like my house more because I can see the house.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I don't mean spotless, like everything, and certainly nothing aligned. Yeah. But it's just a case of all the benches are clean and the coffee table looks like a coffee table and the sofa's tidied up and it just looks like a house I want to live in.
This is so familiar to me.
Luckily you do live in it.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
But I suppose there's a question in there, is that why can't we enjoy our house for a little bit? I don't know. It's just that.
Well, I think you've hit on the thing, and that tidiness isn't really about impressing other people or doing it for other people. It is about doing it for other people in the sense of creating a nice environment that people want to be in. Yeah. But I don't think it's about competing with someone or am I am I messy? It's that it's nice to do. Like it makes a beautiful space that you enjoy being in. It's not really about being house proud or fussing around with a duster all day or something. But
I always think this is one of the reasons you have people over to your house.
Exactly.
Because when else do you get your house looking beautiful and you go, oh, it's so nice, this place. Yeah. I'd like to live here. Yeah. Oh, I do.
Yeah.
Vicky Hastridge has a question.
Can I ask you, Fenella, to talk a bit about food, moving away from tidiness and just some of your ideas about that and welcoming people into your home with food, or what the messages and meanings of that is.
That's so good, Vicky. I had that question down, didn't get time to. So the question was about Fenella's cooking, basically, and what giving food to people in your house means to you.
Yeah, well, I'm all in favour of it. I think, food is hugely important to me, and I've always, cooked since I was, I think, sort of a teenager. My mother bought me these cordon bleu books that used to come out, and they sort of had these like starchy English cooks, in the cordon bleu school making things. So, Mum would be making like chops and 2 veg, and I'd be making chicken Veronique or some, hazelnut galette or something. So, I think, it's a wonderful thing that you can do for people, to have people around to eat and to provide them with food, that you've taken some care over and put. I sort of hate those things, but they said made with love, but it is made with love, I suppose. And you don't do it to impress people. It's not about showing off. It's about giving pleasure to people. So that's an enormously important part of domestic life, I think, for many, not only women, men and women.
You have a lovely piece about when you shared the house with your friend Sue when you were both single parents, and that cooking was a part of your life in a pleasurable way, not a drudgery sort of way.
Yeah, it was, and because it was the two of us there too, it took the edge off having, we do have small children, so you had to sort of feed them, obviously, regularly, which is the drudgery part. But we had friends came around all the time. At that point, people ate everything. Nobody seemed to have any intolerances, so it was kind of easy to feed them. You know, our ex-husbands used to come round regularly, too regularly, and eat. And yeah, I don't know, there was just always a fun thing. One time, you know, Sue made this mango mousse, and she's a really fantastic cook who's influenced me a lot. And that piece is sort of, I think it's called Voyage Around My Kitchen, and all the different phases I've had. But, you know, I remember coming in one night and Sue had made a mango mousse or something, and the man who I didn't know his name, I just came in, this like a bowl, you know, his head was in this bowl, just licking in the remains of the mango mousse. So, yeah, we had a lot of really great nights. And I like that thing then, you know, that people would just sort of drop in. It wasn't a big deal, it wasn't a dinner party, it was just kind of come around and eat.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing in that piece is it wasn't about having a dinner party and doing chefy stuff. Like food seems to have been overtaken in popular culture by kind of professionalism, which it never should be at home, right?
Yeah, but I know, well, and yet a lot of people don't cook at all now. Like that's the sort of irony. There's more stuff about cooking and MasterChef and everything, and yet a lot of people, you know, it's also Uber Eats. So maybe that's because people think it has become too difficult and they've forgotten that it's just, people don't really care if you've got a gourmet meal or something, so it's good to eat, put it on the table and there you go, you know, have people around.
Probably got time for one more question.
First of all, I wanted to say thank you to Roaring Stories. I didn't know that your book brought, and I'm so excited to be here because it was promoted. But I only read the first part of the book, so I haven't finished. But I wanted to say that I felt it was very personal, like you've opened yourself up and the reader sees an insight not into you but also your home. And when I had a little look on Goodreads, there's a person who posted a review and it's like, she didn't even tell me how to clean my house better.
I know.
Do you feel this is a conversation or is it a two-way street? Are you welcoming responses? Like, are you allowing people?
Not like that. Yeah, no, of course, people can say whatever they like. I think, you know, I have made a bit of a rod for my own back with the title. Because people do say, oh, she didn't tell me how to fake being tidy, and you know, I've paid good money for this. And
I did give Fenella a very big talking to recently about going on Goodreads as an author, which is something you must never do. And she said, oh, why? I'm sure yours are good, and started opening it up. And I'm like, I don't want to hear it. And she said, oh, this one's, oh, no, that one's not. Oh. Anyway, and then 2 weeks later she said, look, I accidentally read something on Goodreads about my new book. It's like, I don't know how that accident came about. But
I was trying to find something.
I'm now going to have a question. Does someone have a burning question? That was a good question.
So yeah, so you know, people can say that, but you know, I mean, there is the chapter on how to be neat and tidy. So I think that's probably it. But it should have been called "How to Fake Being Tidy." That chapter.
And there are very good recipes. And I cooked the chicken tray bake the other day, and it was fantastic. But you've had a lot of response to this book in a very short time. It's only been out a couple of weeks, but you've done a lot of talk back and stuff. And so has anything surprised you in the way that people are responding to the book or to talking about the book?
Oh, well, I think I mentioned that one with the panic room, but the other great talkback person rang up. I was telling this, there's a story in there about a woman who did an experiment with the toilet roll just to see how long it would take for her husband to put the new roll, I think, the old division of labour thing. Anyway,
so she just left it, she didn't...
She didn't do it. You know, she went, okay, I'm just going to I'm going to put the roll there as a bit of a clue, but I'm not going to put it on the holder. Anyway, it took 5 days, but you can read about that. So I was telling, you know, this story on the radio, and this woman said, oh yeah, this Spanish woman said, yes, I tried something like that because in my house I do all the cooking, I do all the washing up, I do the cleaning. But, you know, if I ask, they will help me, you know, with these things.
So these are adult children.
Yeah, adult children and her husband and person. And she said, so then I said, okay, I'm not going to ask, I'm just not going to do it and I'm not going to ask. And I said, oh, how did that go? She said, well, my daughter, you know, a few days later, my daughter comes up and says, Mom, we are all very worried about you because, you know, not cleaning is the first sign of early onset dementia. And the mother said, no, it is not early onset dementia. It is late life feminism.
I think that is a perfect and actually spot on the minute place to end. So Thank you so much, everyone. You must buy this book and give it to your friends because it is really a fantastic gift book, but obviously keep it for yourself first. Please thank Fenella for being here tonight.